Bien, je voudrais d'abord.
First of all, I'd like to be sure that the interpreters can hear me, that the booths are ready. Good morning. And Mr. Register, I'd like you to call the case. This is case IT 95-14T, the prosecutor versus Timur Blaškić. Very well. Could we have the appearances for the parties, please, on the side of the prosecution?
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, Counsel. My name is Mark Harmon. Present with me are my colleagues, Mr. Gregory Kehoe, Mr. Andrew Cayley, and Mr. Simon Hooper. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much.
Your Honors, it's a pleasure to see you this morning, Russell Heyman and Anto Nobilo, on behalf of General Blaškić. Thank you.
Bien, nous pouvons.
We can now begin.
Judgement.
The trial chamber is today rendering its judgment in the case the prosecutor versus Tihomir Blaškić, the accused here present. I should clarify that except where indicated otherwise, I will speak on behalf of the trial chamber, which I had the honor to preside over, and that Judge Shahabuddin has appended a declaration to the judgment. By way of introduction, I wish first, on behalf of the chamber, to thank all those who enabled this trial, made significant by the accused senior position and by the volume of information led at the hearings and by the length of the proceedings, to evolve under the best conditions. The trial chamber first wishes to recall that several judges had to withdraw from the trial before its conclusion. Despite his commitment and drive, Judge Deschen was, as you know, obliged to resign for medical reasons. Once again, I wish to thank Judge Shahabuddin for having consented to take his place forthwith in the days following his election, thereby allowing the trial to commence on the date set. My thoughts also turn to Judge Riyad, whom illness kept away from the trial for several months. It was with some hesitation that, having consulted with the prosecution, the defense, and the accused, the trial chamber requested that he be replaced. However, it knew it could count on the total dedication of Judge Rodriguez, who was given the weighty task of acquainting himself with the entire case file in a very short time. I would also like everyone to be aware of the remarkable work contributed by all those persons who are sometimes forgotten, but who, day after day, compiled the transcripts, more than 18,000 pages in the French version and 25,000 in the English versions, filmed and recorded the hearings, then redacted the recordings to protect the witnesses, translated thousands of pages of documents, which will remain for history, interpreted the proceedings despite the speed of the statements or the exchanges, despite the technical words and expressions used, despite the criticism sometimes made of them when a speaker deemed his turn of phrase was not perfectly rendered. The trial chamber also recalls the invaluable assistance which it received from the registrar, of course, the trial chamber's legal officer, Monsieur Fourmi, and the assistants. I would above all like to pay tribute to the counsel for the prosecution and the defense for the remarkable attitude throughout the trial, thus showing that the ardor of proceedings does not exclude courtesy, at least towards the judges, and that defending the interests one represents does not necessarily entail a permanent quality. The debates were always of the highest quality. Finally, I would point out that the accused testified as a witness for nearly 12 weeks, including the time allotted to the cross-examination and the questions of the judges. Throughout the trial, General Blaškić always showed deference to the judges. I should like to touch upon the length of the proceedings within this general introduction. In terms of form, the trial had only one shortcoming, something which we must all try to remedy in the future, that is, its length. I should like to recall that it opened on the 24th of June 1997, and the proceedings were declared closed a little over 2 years later on the 30th of July 1999. Over the course of these 2 years, the trial chamber would hear 158 witnesses and receive nearly 1,500 exhibits, mostly written documents, some of which consisted of several hundred pages. The parties tendered such detailed submissions that as of today, the French translations have still not been filed with the registry. Naturally, the trial chamber wished to review all the elements of the case file. It verified all the arguments advanced and examined them in relation to one another and in the light of the exhibits. It notes in this respect that the parties submitted to it quite a large number of orders or reports issued by the accused. Every element of those orders has its importance, the actual content of the document itself, of course, but also its addressees, the day and even the hour of its transmission, its references where they exist, everything which permits the declarations of the witnesses to be confirmed or rejected. In this regard, the trial chamber must state its regret that it did not obtain all the available information, especially the other orders and reports issued by the accused, his superiors or subordinates, which were, or perhaps still are, stored in the archives. It must, however, express its dissatisfaction at the attitude of certain states not emanating from the former Yugoslavia and certain entities which demonstrated true cooperation with the tribunal and which, as the trial chamber knows, provided a considerable volume of information to the parties. In sum, the trial chamber would take 7 months to deliver its judgment, 7 months to check element of evidence by element, witness statement by witness statement, whether and to what extent General Blaškić's responsibility for the facts ascribed to him was established. Before proceeding to the explanation, it is probably appropriate to recall the crimes ascribed to the accused and the main arguments of his defense. The trial chamber will then set out the general context in which the conflict at issue fits and how it must be characterized. Next, it will recall in brief the facts, in any case some of the more notable facts of the conflict. Lastly, the trial chamber will present its findings as to the responsibility of the accused for the crimes committed and the discriminatory nature of those crimes. The crimes ascribed to the accused. Tihomir Blaškić is charged with having committed, ordered, planned, or otherwise aided and abetted between 1st of May 1992 and 31st January 1994, a crime against humanity, persecution, count 1, attacks upon cities, towns, and villages, killing and causing serious injury, destruction and plunder of property, inhumane treatment of civilians, forcible transfer of civilians, crimes against humanity, willful killing and causing serious injury, count 7 and 10. Grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, 5, 8, 11, 15, 17, and 19, and violations of the laws or customs of war, counts 3, 4, 6, 9, 12 to 14, 16, 18, and 20. Count 2 was withdrawn by the prosecution because it deemed that it was covered by the other counts for killing, serious bodily injury, destruction and plunder of property, destruction of institutions dedicated to education or religion, inhuman or cruel treatment of detainees, including the taking of hostages and their use as human shields. All this against the Muslim population of Central Bosnia, and in particular the Lašva Valley, that is more specifically in the municipalities of Vitez, Busovac, Kiseljak, and to some degree Zenica. General Blaškić is also charged with not having taken reasonable measures to prevent crimes, to punish the perpetrators thereof, although knowing or having reasons to know that the crimes were about to be committed or had been committed. How did General Blaškić respond to those crimes? In his defense, General Blaškić presented a series of arguments which the trial chamber may only reproduce in summary here, but which were presented at length during the trial, most especially when the accused testified and naturally in the final submissions to the trial chamber. These arguments first touch upon the circumstances at the time. General Blaškić was, in his own words, under siege in a way and exposed to the attacks of the Muslim forces, whose objective was to take control of the Lašva Valley by isolating one municipality from another. Under these conditions, and despite his efforts, it was completely impossible for him to maintain a proper command system, particularly given the difficulty of inter-municipality communication. The defense further contended that the crimes committed by the Muslim forces explained the disorderly conduct of the Croatian troops, essentially comprised only of poorly trained soldiers inclined to obey the local authorities rather than his orders. In addition, the crimes committed, and particularly in the case of Ahmići or the booby-trapped Lorin Stari Vitas, were for the most part the work of units not falling under his chain of command, whether these were military police or special units such as the Vitazovi. Whatever the case, General Blaškić never allegedly gave the order to commit the crimes. In the opinion of the defense, the attack on Grbavica demonstrates that when the accused ordered an attack, it adhered to the laws of war, and that the crimes perpetrated subsequent to the attack resulted only from the acts of civilians driven by a spirit of vengeance and left free to act due to the shortcomings of the police authorities. Moreover, General Blaškić always allegedly took care to restate in numerous written orders the need to respect humanitarian law. Allegedly, he could even detain civilians, if only for the purposes of providing them with protection. Finally, the defense maintains that the applicable laws at the time permitted the use of work teams to dig trenches. We now come to the findings of the trial chamber. Before addressing the actual responsibility of the accused, the trial chamber will outline the geographical, political, and military context of the case and reiterate the specific crimes perpetrated. The general context into which the conflict fits is a geographic, political, and military context. The Lashva Valley, as described in the indictment, is an area some 30 kilometers to the northwest of Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It is a region crossed by a road running from southeast to the northwest, which passes along the Sarajevo-Kiseljak stretch before continuing on towards Busovača, then towards Vitez, and going on to Travnik. The distance between Kiseljak and Vitez is about 30 kilometers. The road lies at the bottom of the hills. The defense presented a scale model. If it did exaggerated the height of the hills, the defense admitted that they were increased threefold. It demonstrated the importance of the road to the whole of the region, especially in economic and military terms. All the municipalities of Vitez, Busovača, and Kiseljak would correspond to a thin strip of land stretching, from example, from The Hague to Schiphol and Haarlem. The region was also especially remarkable for its large Croatian population. According to the 1991 census, the Muslim and Croatian populations were distributed as follows. For the Vitez municipality, 11,514 Muslims and 12,675 Croats. Busovača municipality, 8,451 Muslims and 9,093 Croats. Kiseljak municipality, 9,778 Muslims and 12,550 Croats. The town of Zenica had a Muslim majority, 45% Muslims compared to 16.5% Croats. Regarding the political and military context, the trial chamber deems that the crimes perpetrated in the region, which we have just mentioned, were admittedly committed in the context of an armed conflict between the Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats, but before all else in the context of an armed international conflict. In early 1992, Tihomir Blaškić was in Vienna, in Austria, having resigned from the former Yugoslav army, the JNA. According to his statements, he was recalled in February 1992 to his birth town of Kiseljak by the municipal council, who were relying on obtaining his services to organize the defense of the municipality against the Serbs. Upon his arrival, Croats and Muslims cooperated to this end. However, the situation rapidly deteriorated. As of 8 April 1992, the Bosnian Croats, organized within the democratic community of Herceg-Bosna, which we will refer to as HZHB, created on 18 November 1991, And the Croats, organized in this way, instituted the HVO, the Croatian Defense Council, which was both a military and a political structure. On the following day, the 9th of April, 1992, the Muslims formed the Territorial Defense, the TO, which, at the end of 1992, would become the Muslim Army of Bosnia-Herzegovina, or the ABIH. Furthermore, I should like to recall that on the 6th of April 1992, the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina declared its independence. On 7 April, Croatia recognized Bosnia-Herzegovina as an independent state. Nevertheless, at the same time, it granted Croatian citizenship to the members of the Croatian nation of Bosnia-Herzegovina who so requested. On the 18th of May, the United Nations Security Council recommended that the Republic of Croatia be admitted to the United Nations, Resolution 753, and on 20th of May, the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Simultaneously, the Security Council called for a cessation to external intervention in the territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that units of the JNA and of the Croatian Army, we will call it the HV, units there to withdraw, to place themselves under the authority of the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina, or to be disbanded and disarmed. Security Council Resolution 752. We are now talking about May 1992. The presence of external forces was therefore widely known. But what of the region with which we are dealing? The evidence tendered presents apparently contradictory and vague perspectives, which the trial chamber endeavored to clarify. Despite individual local differences, quite a simple picture can be drawn. As the trial chamber indicates, the Lashva Valley was an area in which the Serbs made up only a minority of the population. Nevertheless, the Serbian forces were not far away. They were at Jajce to the west, and they were advancing to Kiseljak in the southeast. The front had to be held. The control of arms was the order of the day, and they were taken from wherever they were found, for example, at the former JNA barracks in Kiseljak or in Kaonik. They next had to be handed out. This was the trigger to the conflicts which would be all the more violent as nationalism intensified. The AZHB, the Croatian community of Herceg-Bosna, had internal disagreements between the supporters of multi-ethnicity, or in any case cohabitation with the Muslims, and the most die-hard Croatian nationalists. The latter unquestionably received the support of Zagreb. An international conflict, that is the nature of the conflict in question, an international armed conflict. The Republic of Croatia did not content itself merely with remaining a spectator on the sidelines or even simply to protect its borders. It intervened in the conflict, pitting the Muslims and Croats of central Bosnia against each other. Let us recall that Franjo Tuđman and Slobodan Milošević met in March 1991 to discuss the partitioning of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which would have led to its disappearance, at least as a distinct entity. According to one defense witness, Croatia harbored ambitions in respect of the territories within Bosnia-Herzegovina considered as Croatian for 150 years. In any case, President Tuđman's nationalism and his territorial ambitions became evident to many of those with whom he spoke, including Lord Owen and witnesses Paddy Ashdown, II and X, heard by the trial chamber. We are sometimes obliged to use pseudonyms to protect witnesses. As acknowledged by some of its highest-ranking officers, such as General Bobetko, Admiral Domazet, or General Petković, Croatia sent troops to southern Bosnia-Herzegovina into Bosnian territory. However, it did not stop there. The evidence noted by the trial chamber in its judgment demonstrates that the troops of the Croatian army, the HV, were observed at many locations in Bosnian territory, including in the Lashva Valley. Documents show that very many HV soldiers served within the HVO and were ordered to remove their HV insignia and replace them with those of the HVO. Most HV officers were, in fact, HV officers. An exception at the time is not General Blaškić, now an inspector in the disciplinary body of the Army of the Republic of Croatia. The presence of these men was reinforced by substantial material assistance. The trial chamber concurs that Croatia might also have supplied some assistance to Bosnia-Herzegovina. However, this assistance dried up, at least within the region and period under consideration, whereas the total aid sent by Croatia to all structures of Herzegovina was assessed at 1 million German marks a day. The objectives of the Croatian nationalists of Croatia were evidently shared by many members of the HVO and the Croatian community of Herzegovina, including Mate Boban, of course, president of the community, but also Anto Valenta, president of the Vitez HDZ, then president of the HDZ for the HZHB, and whose nationalist writings are revealing. Ignat Kostroman, Secretary General of the HZHB, Dario Kordic, Vice President of the HZHB, whose speeches fired up the Bosnian Croats. The trial chamber will cite here, by way of example, the minutes of a meeting on 12 November 1991 signed by Mate Boban and Dario Kordic, and I quote, "The Croatian people of Bosnia-Herzegovina must finally opt for an active and determined policy to achieve their eternal dream, a common Croatian state." It is still the case, however, that the nationalists found it unacceptable that the Muslims could want to have a defense. The Bosnian Territorial Defense, the TO, which we mentioned a moment ago, was formed on the 9th of April 1992. On 10 April, Mate Boban outlawed the TO in the territory of HZHB. The Croatian general, Anto Rosso, confirmed this in an order of 8 May, and on 11 May, Tihomir Blaškić implemented that order by pronouncing the TO, the Territorial Defense, unlawful in the territory of the Kiseljak municipality, a matter to which we will return. Let us now consider the conflict in the Lashva Valley. From May 1992 until January 1993 first, and then we will talk about the situation in April 1993. But between these two periods, we must refer to an important event that had an important political importance. That is the Vance-Owen plan. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast for the interpreters. Beginning in May 1992 until January 1993, tensions between the Muslim and Croatian populations would increase, and incidents break out particularly when one side thought it could gain a tactical or strategic advantage, such as control of a village, a town, former military warehouses, or a road. The provocations and incidents multiplied, such as the Croatian flag being flown on public buildings and officers of Croatian origin being kidnapped. The first destruction of mosques and Muslim houses, the first civilian murders, and first acts of plunder would be seen. In a narrow strip of territory, as we saw, internal displacement of Muslim populations driven from their dwellings by the crimes of the Croats were added to the movement of Croatian and particularly Muslim refugees chased from their lands by the Serbs. The accused, Colonel Blaškić, at the time appointed commander of Central Bosnian Operative Zone, as we know, on the 27th of June 1992. And the order was issued by whom? By a general of the Croatian army, Ante Rosso. In accordance with this order, issued by a Croatian general, Milivoj Petković, the operative zone incorporated the municipalities we are dealing with, those of Vitez, Busovača, and Kiseljak. In August 1992, serious incidents erupted around the village of Duri to the south of Kiseljak, whose mosque was destroyed. In the autumn, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The HVO sought to force the Muslims to hand over their arms, and shots were fired in and around Vitez. On 20th of October, the Muslims established a roadblock at Ahmići. They claimed, the Muslims, that it was to prevent HVO troops from reinforcing the Croatian positions in Travnik. The Croats, on their part, asserted that their forces were moving up to the front facing the Serbs in Jajce. Whatever the case, a Croatian soldier was killed, the roadblock was knocked down, and the Muslims' arms confiscated. Tensions remained high, while the forces on the ground organized. The accused formed brigades within a military structure. The Army of Bosnia-Herzegovina formed its Third Corps based in Zenica. I said that I would make a digression by referring to an important diplomatic step, and that is the Vance-Owen plan. In January 1993, the Vance-Owen plan was presented. This peace plan defined, among other things, a decentralized Bosnia-Herzegovina organized into 10 provinces, each enjoying substantial autonomy and necessarily governed by a democratically elected local government. According to the statements of one witness, the whole reasoning behind the plan was that there should be a division of power, with one nationality being predominant in some zones, but not to the prejudice of the other nationalities. Power was to be exercised with respect for the minorities. It should be borne in mind that the Lashva Valley was largely located in Province 10, with the rest of that valley, the southern part of the municipality of Kiseljak, being in Province 7. The plan came down to assigning the main provinces in Province 10 to the Croats and to the Muslims in Province 7. Nevertheless, in the minds of the Croatian nationalists, and particularly Mate Boban, president of the HZHB, the Croatian community of Herceg-Bosna, that meant that Province 10 was Croatian. It also meant that territories which they considered historically Croatian would be incorporated within the predominantly Muslim Province 7, which was unacceptable to them. It was in any case best to ensure Croatian dominance in the regions affected. I must say that the Vance-Owen plan never came to be implemented on the ground, but the Croats, and in particularly the Bosnian Croats, bore a heavy responsibility in conducting the war in anticipation of its implementation and in willing its unilateral execution. As of January 15, 1993, Mate Boban sent an ultimatum to the Muslims, ordering them inter alia to hand over their arms. Faced with their refusal, the Croatian forces conducted operations meant to Croatize some territories by force. Hundreds of Muslims were arrested and many imprisoned in Kaonik in the former JNA warehouses. Many of them were beaten. Most had to dig trenches, often under inhuman conditions and exposed to enemy fire. In so doing, they were beaten, even killed, and sometimes used as human shields. The considerable efforts made by the European Commission Monitoring Mission, the ECMM, and the efforts of the United Nations Protection Force enabled some prisoners of war to be released and the conflict to be contained. However, this situation was not to last, and my colleagues and me will deal with the situation in the Lashva Valley in April 1993. On 15th of April, the Croats, especially through the voice of Dario Kordic at a televised public meeting, issued a new ultimatum. Tihomir Blaškić declared, also on television, that HVO soldiers had been attacked in Nadioci. In a written order, he commanded the HVO brigades and the Vitezovi special unit to fire back if attacked, and then instructed the HVO brigades and the 4th Battalion of the military police to defend themselves against what he termed Muslim terrorist attacks. On the 16th of April at 0130 hours, issued a combat order to the Vitez Brigade and the Tvrtko independent units to, and I quote, prevent the attacks of extremist Muslim forces. The formation's concerns had to be ready, and again I quote, to commence shooting at 5:30 hours on the 16th of April 1993. In fact, on 16th of April 1993 at 5:30 hours, and then over the following days, the Lashva Valley became the theater of numerous crimes. Civilians were killed or wounded, houses set alight, minarets brought down, mosques destroyed, women and children separated from the men and left with no choice but to flee, women raped and men imprisoned, beaten and led off to the front to dig trenches. Everywhere the same or virtually the same scenario was played out. An artillery attack, sometimes with homemade weapons, babies, was launched with complete disregard for the consequences and followed up by an infantry attack. It mattered little whether the objective had, at least in part, some military interest. It was sufficient to do such as to make it impossible for the Muslims to live there once the Croats had conquered the ground. This was true to such an extent that undefended villages, which were not military targets, were destroyed. 16th of April 1993, Ahmići, a village with a very large Muslim majority, known for the fervent practice and teaching of the Muslim religion, and whose largest mosque had just been rebuilt. A village perched high up overlooking the main Busovačevitas road, but some distance away from it. A village where there was no Muslim army. It is 5:30 on the 16th of April, and the artillery opens fire. The Croatian inhabitants left the evening before. Only those who were armed and wanted to kill remained behind, to kill the terror-stricken Muslims who were awoken in the dead of night, who left their houses to flee and who fell to the bullets of the awaiting soldiers. Muslims, women, children, and the old included, forced out of their homes in order to be killed. Muslims who hid under their beds, in their cellars, and who were burnt alive in the flames of their houses. These facts are known. The defense finally acknowledged that these facts were materially incontestable. After much prevarication, the defense ended up clearly implicating the troops whom it claimed had committed all those crimes, that is, the military police, and in particular a special unit thereof, the Jokers, whose commander was Vladimir Šantić, assisted by Anto Furunđija, who also prosecuted by this tribunal for facts related to this attack.